This hearing is called to order. This is a public hearing of the City Council Committee on Labor and Civil Service. The purpose of this public hearing is to hear testimony on Bill number 190132 and resolutions number 190196 and 190193. I recognize the presence of a quorum of the committee. Members of the committee in attendance are, to my left, Council President Darrell Clark, Councilwoman Maria Quinones Sanchez, and appointed to the committee is Councilman Curtis Jones. I want to just, for the record, ask any of my colleagues if they have any opening remarks they would like to make. We shall first hear testimony on Bill number 190132 and then go to a public meeting to consider the action on the bill. Then we shall go back to the public hearing on both resolutions. The clerk will now read the title of Bill number 190132.
Bill number 190132, an ordinance amending Title 22 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Public Employees Retirement Code by amending various provisions to provide for purchase of service by certain classes of employees under certain terms and conditions.
The clerk will please call the first witnesses to testify on the bill.
Sylvie Galya Howard from the Philadelphia Commerce Department.
Thank you. Good morning, and please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Is this on? Yeah. Good morning. My name is Sylvie Galya Howard. I'm First Deputy Commerce Director. I'm joined today by Edward Garcia, our Deputy Commerce Director for Finance and Administration.
Good morning.
Thank you, Chairperson Parker and members of the Labor and Civil Service Committee for giving me the opportunity to testify in support of Bill number 190132, amending Title 22 of the Philadelphia Code, entitled Public Employees Retirement Code, by amending various provisions to provide for purchase of service by certain classes of employees. Towards the end of last year, we made the decision to move a number of Commerce staff who were previously on the PIDC payroll to the city's payroll. We made this decision in order to correct a legacy issue, to streamline our HR operations and reduce our administrative costs, but most importantly, to create parity among all Commerce employees regarding their pay, health benefits, and retirement plan options. This bill, which was drafted in consultation with the Finance Department and the Law Department, will allow these Commerce Department employees to purchase up to 4 years of service time in the city's pension program for time they were on the PIDC payroll working on behalf of Commerce. We have always treated these employees as fully equal members of the Commerce Department and believe that they are equally deserving of the pension benefits that we all receive as employees of the city. Thank you all for your time this morning, and I want to especially thank Councilmember Jones for his sponsorship of this bill and for always supporting our hardworking Commerce Department employees, and all of you do that as well. I am happy to answer any questions that you might have for me at this time.
Madam Chair.
Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Chairwoman Parker, Chairperson Parker. Well, get it right. I'm proud to have introduced this bill on behalf of members of PIDC who are now also staffers of the Commerce Department to be equal to their counterparts by joining the city's pension plan. This bill, also supported by the mayor and the Commerce Department, is an important equalizing bill. These employees, public servants, have served our city for decades, changing the downtown skyline and in areas like 5th Street and Wadsworth Avenue as well. So they've worked in downtown and in Center City. They're reaching their retirement years, many of them, and they should not have to retire to poverty. A guy I worked with for over 10 years, Johnny G, I'm gonna call him, worked and received what was a 401k contribution. He retired. There was a big ceremony for him. He had worked all his life. He was the kind of guy who would walk down 9th Street and people would come out bringing loaves of bread to him and thanking him for the awnings that they put up or the rebate that they received. But after he retired, after 2 years of retirement, he had to come back to work because he had ran through, one shopping trip with your family almost decimated his lifetime savings. So he had to come back to work, and that's a sad commentary for someone who dedicated their life to the city of Philadelphia. Sacrifice of these workers continued. They could have worked for the private sector, many of them, banking and in insurance. They chose to work in the city of Philadelphia that had lower pay rates with the hope that someday they would be able to retire to a decent pension plan. Just like we fight for 32BJ, we should fight for them. They're our neighbors. They're not people who live outside the city. They cannot. They live in our neighborhoods. And so they should be supported in the same way that they would support people who work for the sanitation department, recreation department, the commerce department. And so if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, and I support this legislation.
Thank you, Councilman Jones. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you. Just for the record, how many people does this impact? And by the way, I really do appreciate the administration's work on realigning these. I think it's so, going back to Councilman Jones's part, I think it adds for more transparency about how we do business, so.
So the total number of commerce employees was, it was 30 positions. It was 27 that were filled at the time. There were also 3 people that were brought over from the Office of Arts and Culture, who were also on PIDC. We moved to, as you said, realign, and 2 people that were in planning and development as well that were moved over just previously. So all in all, I believe the number is 33.
33. And then the average pay around? What's the salary range?
I can get that for you. I know that the average pay is for commerce is in line with what these positions are. It's about $67,000.
And do we know what the estimated cost of this would be if everybody,
The estimated cost to the employees or the estimated cost to the
to
department?
the pension plan?
The estimated, the employees have to buy back into the plan, so they have to put whatever they would have contributed had they been on the pension system at the time. So I don't have those numbers. It depends sort of how long they stay with the city, all of those
You
different
picked
factors.
4 years. Was there a reason why 4 years?
Yeah, so do you want me to? So in the beginning when PIDC was more closely aligned with the city, there was a pension plan at PIDC that ended because of financial reasons and changes at PIDC. So the disparity between how commerce employees were treated on PIDC payroll and commerce employees on city payroll became wider. And so when we got the opportunity to look at it and say the costs are the same for us to keep these employees on PIDC payroll, but they're not getting the same benefits. It really, the gap between the time that they stopped being able to have pension and the time that they came over into the city was 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to be clear, they can collect their pension if they were at PIDC that ended 4 years ago, and then this would allow them to buy back the time since that defined benefit plan ended.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Chair recognizes the presence of Councilman Dom in comments.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good morning. I may have missed this, but in a simple answer, what is the cost to the city?
So we looked at if every employee were to buy back fully what they are able to buy back of those 4 years, and it's about $90,000. But that's if everybody buys back everything.
$90,000 in total?
Total.
Yeah, and that's interest payments that they would have paid had they had the money been in the city's treasury.
So $90,000 is the total cost to accomplish this for the city?
Yeah, if all of them buy back the entirety of their time that they're able to, the cost to the individual employees is more than that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you. I just want to say a special thank you to Councilman Jones for introducing this legislation. And Councilman Jones, I really also appreciate your acknowledging that these employees, unlike others who have an option to decide whether or not they want to live within city limits, or as we always state, go across the line. In our instance, for you, City Avenue, for me, Cheltenham Avenue. And so it's important that these Philadelphia residents get access to the retirement security that they deserve and that they've earned. I just want to note that for the record. We're not giving them anything. They've worked for it and they've earned it. Are there any other questions from members of the committee for this panel? Seeing none, we will now go into a public meeting to consider the action to be taken on the bill being heard today. The chair recognizes Councilmember Jones for a motion on the amendment to Bill number 190132.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I offer an amendment to Bill number 190132. A copy of this amendment has been circulated to all members of the committee, and I move that the amendment to Bill number 190132 be approved.
Second. It's been moved and properly seconded that the amendment to Bill number 190132 be approved. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the ayes have it, and the motion carries, and the amendment to Bill number 190132 has been approved. The chair recognizes Councilmember Jones for a motion on Bill number 190132 as amended.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I move that Bill number 190132, as amended, be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at our next session of council.
Second. It has been moved and properly seconded that Bill number 190132, as amended, be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. Bill number 190132, as amended, will be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, with a request that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading at the next session of council. We shall now conclude this public meeting and go back to the public hearing on resolutions number 190196 and 190193. The clerk will now read the title of resolution number 190196.
A resolution authorizing City Council's Committee on Labor and Civil Service to hold hearings regarding parking workers deserving a living wage.
Thank you. Before we begin, I just want to make some brief comments as the sponsor of this resolution. I imagine that this cannot be more true for parking workers, many of whom are toiling with long hours, facing the elements, cold, heat, wind, all while guarding over vehicles of wealthier workers, suburban dwellers, and tourists. Many of the parking attendants earn as little as $8 an hour and must pay for their health care out of their meager wages or go without. They have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to get by. And when many of these workers speak out about their wages and treatment, the companies respond with retaliation and even firings. This is disgraceful behavior on behalf of these companies. And the parking industry is just one example of an industry that is booming on the backs of black and brown low-wage workers. 87% of parking workers are African American or African. And while we know that Center City is booming, many of these companies, organizations, and yes, parking lots and garages would cease to function without the qualified and capable men and women who often work silently behind the scenes. I've heard from parking attendants who live in my district, and they have told me stories about how terribly they feel when they're not able to provide for their families, or when they feel that they don't just even get a chance to see their families because they're working 2 or 3 jobs. The time to lift wages for all Pennsylvanians and Philadelphians is now, and I am proud to sponsor this resolution. And I do want to note for the record, I believe that there is some hope. And when I say that there is some hope coming from the private sector. I'm thinking about Jefferson, that recently voluntarily decided to pay their workers a higher wage. They did this without being required to do so. They did it because they decided that it was not only in the best interest of their employees, but also in the best interest, their best interest as an employer. The clerk will please call the first panel to testify on the resolution.
Rich Laser from the Mayor's Office.
Excuse me, the chair recognizes the presence of Councilman O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like my vote to be recorded as aye on Bill number 190132.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman O'Neill is noted for the record. Good morning. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning, Chair Parker and members of the committee. My name is Richard Laser, and I am the Deputy Mayor for Labor. I appear before you today to testify on resolution number 190193. The resolution authorizes council to hold hearings today on the wages of parking workers, and I would like to thank you for this opportunity to testify. The administration supports the intent of this hearing. As pointed out in the resolution, the median wage of workers in this industry is just $9.50 an hour, and almost 70% of parking workers earn less than the median income for Philadelphia. These wages are just too low. Hard-working Philadelphians should not have to face poverty when they work 40 hours or more each week. They should not have to juggle second or even third jobs to make ends meet. We are here for parking workers today. We all know that this is part of a larger issue. This is part of a reckoning that is occurring nationally and locally on just how inadequate the federal minimum wage is. You simply can't afford to pay your bills, pay your rent, and raise your kids on $7.25 an hour. And the poverty and struggle we see in our city today is a result of a system which sets people up to fail. This is an issue where council and the administration are clearly aligned. We will not see the systematic change we need without raising the minimum wage. Unfortunately, we also know that Philadelphia is unable to unilaterally raise the minimum wage due to state preemption on this issue. So we once again call on our colleagues in Harrisburg to either raise the minimum wage for all Pennsylvanians or grant Philadelphia the right to do so for workers within our own municipal boundaries. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify, and I can answer any questions at this time.
Thank you. The chair wants to recognize the presence of Councilwoman Helen Gim. I also want to thank you, Mr. Laser, for your testimony today, and to also thank the administration and Mayor Kenny for unequivocally supporting this effort and for working with us in efforts to raise awareness about the importance of increasing the minimum wage and allowing Philadelphians to have a voice on this issue in Harrisburg. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, will the clerk call the next panel?
Thank you.
Steve Herzenberg, Rodney Muhammad, and Rev Nicholas ORourke.
Good morning. Will you please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
I will do that. Thank you. Just before I get started, I just want to let you know my colleagues, Minister Muhammad and Reverend ORourke, are caught in the line downstairs, but they'll be here. Let me get rid of my, sorry for this.
And it was a long line.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Good morning, Chairperson Parker, Council President Clark, other members of the City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today based on our report, Parking Industry Fuels Poverty in Philadelphia, which I just shared with the committee. My name is Steve Herzenberg. I'm an economist and the executive director of Keystone Research Center, the mission of which is to promote a more prosperous and equitable Pennsylvania, and the website of which is www.keystoneresearch.org, where you can find our parking garage report, as well as lots of other information, including on why we should raise the Pennsylvania minimum wage. I hold a PhD in economics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. We undertook our study of the parking garage industry in the context of broad concern about persistent poverty in the city of Philadelphia and persistent deep poverty in the city of Philadelphia, measured by the share of families with incomes below half the poverty line. As the economy continues to expand and the unemployment rate falls, more people have jobs. One critical culprit for Philadelphia's high poverty rates takes on greater and greater importance: low wages. To shine a spotlight on this problem and point the way towards a solution, we undertook our study of the Philadelphia parking garage industry, informed by a survey of its workers conducted by the Service Employees International Union 32BJ. What we found is truly stunning. Let me paint a picture for you. Parking garage workers in Philadelphia work in a highly profitable $30 billion U.S. industry that generates over $450 million in revenues in the city of Philadelphia alone. Yet its workers earn, as we have heard, a median wage of only $9.50 per hour. Half of workers earn less than that, some a lot less. At that $9.50 per hour wage, a single Philadelphia adult must work 68 hours per week to afford basic housing, food, public transportation, and other necessities, according to the Economic Policy Institute's Family Budget Calculator. But since half of these workers have more than one child, they would actually need to earn over 100 hours in the parking garage industry to pay for their family budget. In response to low wages, parking garage workers do indeed work very long hours. All of those surveyed worked at least a 40-hour week, with 4 in 10 working 50 hours or more, and 1 in 6 working 70 or more hours. A work week more reminiscent of early 20th century steel mills than what we would like to see in 21st century Philadelphia. Even while working more than one job or very long hours, parking garage workers live paycheck to paycheck. Over half have difficulty paying one or more of their bills. 1/3 struggle to pay utility bills, nearly 1/3 to pay for housing, and 1/5 even for food. These workers receive few benefits. Less than half participate in a company health care plan. 40% do not even receive paid vacation. 1/3 have no health insurance at all. The parking garage industry's poverty jobs reinforce racial inequities in the city of Philadelphia. Nearly 9 out of 10 parking garage workers are African American, or Black, and or over age 24, with half 45 or older, and older. Given limited opportunities for upward mobility within this industry, there is only one solution that can lift these workers into the middle class. They need better pay and benefits. The $15 per hour wage standard now established as a respectable minimum in large U.S. cities. Other service industries in Philadelphia point the way forward if we want to transform poverty wage jobs into middle class jobs. Building cleaners, security guards, and airport workers have come together into unions that have lifted wages in their industries to nearly $15 per hour or above, while improving benefits. That same homegrown Philadelphia solution would work for the parking garage industry. If the 1,000 Philadelphia parking garage workers earned a living wage, they could lift themselves out of poverty and into Philadelphia's new middle class. Pour another $15 million in consumer buying power into Philadelphia's neighborhoods, driving the economy forward. Save taxpayers an estimated $2.3 million in public assistance for Medicaid and food stamps that currently subsidize the industry's low-wage jobs but would no longer be needed. And improve service and safety for parking garage customers, thanks to lower turnover and an increase in workers' experience. We need a homegrown solution because Washington and Harrisburg will not help. In fact, Harrisburg continues to deliberately impede the ability to create more living wage and jobs in Philadelphia by preempting the city's right to set its own minimum wage above the state minimum wage, an action that 40 one cities and other localities across the country have already done in other states. The city's 1,000 parking garage workers cater to many of the city's highest income professionals, managers, and consumers. They often brave the cold and the heat for long hours, but are still unable to support their families because of their low wages. Members of City Council should do everything in their power to ensure that these parking garage workers can exercise their freedom to join together into a union. This unionization would benefit parking garage operators as well as customers by creating a more stable workforce and eliminating the managerial headaches that result from a substantial share of workers quitting each year. The basic formula that can eliminate poverty in the parking garage industry, ensuring workers' freedom to unionize, recognizing that employers cannot relocate because this service industry's customers are here in Philadelphia, is the most powerful tool Philadelphia workers and other residents have economy-wide to make work pay again and to dramatically and permanently reduce poverty and deep poverty in this city. The sooner this is recognized, the sooner that workers, city leaders, and community members recognize area-wide service industry unions as the core of the next social contract, the sooner we can restore economic justice in this city and then build out from there to the region and to the state. Thank you.
I just want to note for the record before we hear from Minister Muhammad that Rev Nicholas ORourke of Power will be submitting his testimony for the record. Please proceed, Minister Muhammad.
In the name of Almighty God, the beneficent, the merciful, I am Minister Rodney Muhammad, Minister of Mosque number 12, and also President of the NAACP Philadelphia. I didn't submit a written testimony because what they put together really says it for me in terms of the savings for the city and what we really need to do for the working population in the city. In the book of Exodus, you know, Pharaoh put on the people a raising of the tally of bricks with less straw. For us, that really means people are being charged to make a living out of nothing. And unfortunately, it's the culture, a growing culture in these United States of America. They're cutting off social mobility, strangling the economy. People are not talking so much now about pursuing the American dream. They're just trying to get away from the American nightmare. If that could just happen for them, you see people feeling a sense of relief. I know since 2007 there has been almost a freezing of wages in this country. And what has taken place is an obscene increase in the pay to CEOs, and there's been a heavy concentration of wealth at the top. As a child, I was given a little, I don't know if it's a fairy tale or what, Jack and the Beanstalk, and you know, the people were poor, they had nothing, and all the gold was at the top. This structural kind of inequality only promises to bring more social unrest, and it's going to put a heavier burden on government to provide services that people could have provided for themselves had they had the chance. We're weaponizing philanthropy with groups now that are helping to serve this idea that the people are poor because they're lazy, the same as Pharaoh said in the book of Exodus, but people are not given a chance to work. And there have been numbers that I could go through historically that show that if there's any promise, any hope that people can get work, they come off of welfare rolls at the blink of an eye. They come away from trying to be under subsidized living in no limit of time when an opportunity is open. These parking lot attendants are in now $1 billion industry. We can find no reason in the NAACP for them to have to live and subsist on $8 an hour, $9.50 an hour, et cetera, with little or no benefits for people that can provide those benefits. I don't buy into the argument that because they pay taxes in Philadelphia, if they could get the taxes erased, somehow that would give them the chance to be able to do better by their employees. They can do better by their employees right now. There's enough money for that, and so we're gonna stand behind this. Now we know that there's statutes in Pennsylvania that won't allow for us to get to some of the magic numbers that we need, that we call a living wage. But unionizing, and unions have been the only real check on these high levels of income inequality that have taken place in the last 2 decades. We're going to have to localize this fight in the way that the only real pathway to get some kind of economic and social justice for parking lot attendants is for them to be unionized in this city. So as an NAACP president, as a minister, as a citizen of Philadelphia, I support that effort. I believe that when people are furnished with enough to live off of, and that's all it is enough to live off of, as they spend in the economy, it begins to shrink the government's burden to help citizens that are falling through the cracks in our fair city. As a man of God, I know this will not always be, for the Bible promises us that a day is coming when the rich man is going to weep and howl. We're the 99%. We may be weeping and howling right now, but the rich man's turn is coming. And no matter what standards we have in government, there's a higher calling. There's a greater law. There's a judge beyond the ones that we can pay off that will exact a judgment, and we're promised in the book of James that the rich man will weep and howl. So I just call on City Council to remember that, because when we're sworn into government, we put our hands on a Bible. We need to open it. And you'll find in it principles, you'll find in it guidelines, and you'll find in it the strength to do what is right. And I think what's right today is for City Council to put the parking lot attendants as workers in our fair city on the yellow brick road to self-development. Thank you very much.
I want to thank both of you for your testimony, and I want to thank both of you for your testimony, and I want to recognize the presence of my colleague, Councilman Taubenberger. Mr. Herzenberg, I want to say to you, thank you for acknowledging in your testimony the advances that have been made for other service industries in Philadelphia in an effort to transform poverty wage jobs into middle-class jobs. And we can't have a conversation in this building without mentioning the name of Councilman Wilson Good Jr., who was the lead in this legislative body and helped to force the change. With that being said, I want both of you, both of you sort of sent me on a stroll back to my days in Harrisburg when trying to learn how to garner support for issues that would positively impact working people in our city and in our Commonwealth. I learned very early that tugging on the heartstrings of some folks didn't work. It seemed like their hearts were made of stone. And so for me, I learned that a positive economic analysis argument was always what would get their attention. And both of you talked about the increase in wages as a tool or to put people on a path to self-sufficiency. So your argument wasn't just about what was morally right and just.
Right.
It's that if we do this, it makes good economic sense
Exactly.
for the city and for
Exactly.
the Commonwealth, because if I am in a position where I can take care of myself, where I have access to health care, it is highly likely that I will not be dependent on government
That's
in
right.
order to take care of myself.
That's right.
And so
That's right.
I want both of you, if you will, to just comment about what that path to self-sufficiency means and why it makes good economic sense, just not moral sense.
I think God shows us because, in the book of Scripture, the hope for the oppressed and the poor was a land that flowed with milk and honey. And I found through every study that no matter what man does, no matter what powers and intellect he exerts, he can never duplicate what God has done to make milk, and he can never duplicate what God has done to make honey. So it shows me that these two fluids, they serve as a reminder to us that there are some things only God can really do for us. And so this guideline shows me, as I talked about the bee in the press conference, the honeybee goes to the flower to extract nectar of what it needs. But it makes sure that it leaves something with the flower so that the flower can not only live but thrive. And it's called pollen. And this cross-pollination ensures the bee that it can come back and get more nectar because it has provided the flower with something that will make the flower be able to produce more on its return. We need a honey scent economic approach, where people who can invest in people, if you give people what it takes for people to be able to live, you'll always be able to come back, because people are furnished with enough for your return. A bee works a good economic policy in its relationship to the flower. But if it only extracted nectar and never left none, that's not a bee, that's a parasite. And so we have to stop this parasitical approach to living in America. And that's how we got to this 1% of the people. It's an insane way to live. And as I said before, it drives people to give up on pursuing the American dream. You're just trying to escape the American nightmare. Thank you.
Steve?
It's always a little easier for the economist to precede the man of God, but than follow him. Sorry. Whoops. So, the basic economics are laid out in the report, but again, there'd be 2.3 million in excuse me. We need some more.
Just hold on, we're going to bring you some water.
Yeah, it's fine. Thank you. 2.3 million in savings, and that's just counting a couple of the programs that low-wage workers depend on. There'll be benefits for consumers in terms of parking garages will be safer. Attendants will be able to give them more guidance in terms of how to get to the theater or to the restaurant or whatever other meeting that they're going to. You're going to have fewer cars that end up a little bit scratched because the drivers have got a lot more experience. And then again, from employers' point of view, we run through the numbers in the report, but increasing these folks' wages is a tiny fraction of the total revenues that this industry takes in. And that's before you get to the savings that employers get, because they don't need as many human resource managers. When you get rid of the headaches of turnover, that saves the company money as well as make managers' jobs a lot easier. And we don't do this in the report, but people in this room know this, that if you costed out the broader social savings that come from having more middle-wage jobs in terms of communities and families are healthier, and therefore they do better in school, and therefore they do better as adults. Supporting these workers in empowering them to have middle-class jobs and to support their families. In the end, it will save the city of Philadelphia long-term. So it's economic sense as well as economic justice.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the fact that this morning's conversations, both from the parking attendants to the domestic workers, is really talking about the Philadelphia story, right? And narrowing this gap that exists between Philadelphians who want to work in dignity and industries who have been slow to move in the direction that the city has been trying to get industry to. You know, I'm often reminded of when we talked about this at the airport, when we talked about the security workers, people said these types of campaigns weren't going to be successful, but they've been successful because we have, to Councilwoman Parker's point, we have demonstrated that they do make economic sense, and that it's not just a moral obligation, but it's how do we ensure that people don't feel like we're always asking for a hand out.
Right.
Because folks, you know, when I look at the workers, I look at people who sometimes travel 2 and 3 bus lines, skip meals with their own families.
That's right.
All of those things that really hurt and traumatize families, housing instability. When I look at every time we're sitting in this council trying to figure out how to help folks become tax compliant and pay their bills, and you know, the amount of money that we put forward to help even out the playing field for folks. And so BOMA, other folks have, there's a business model. This makes sense. This makes absolute sense. I wanted, because you looked at some of the state programming, in your surveying of workers, were you able to drill down on some of the city benefits and if folks were assessing those and at what rate?
We didn't do that. So what that means is that our $2.3 million savings is very conservative because we didn't put a number on housing benefits from the city or child care from the city. So, I mean, we'd happily work with the city and council to sort of cost that out as well. But I think your bottom line argument is dead on. And I mean, where you started in terms of the Philadelphia story is also worth amplifying. I mean, the series of industries in which workers have already been lifted up, thanks to the support of council, Councilman Good and BJ in the past, there is a story of how we get to a Philadelphia economy that works for all. In this report, in the successes of other workers. We have been told for 40 years now that globalization, technological change, say goodbye to the middle class, we can't have one anymore. That is a bunch of rot. And this is the Economist telling you that. It is within our reach, if we let workers in the economy we have today come together to take low-wage jobs and make them middle-class jobs, that is a formula to getting to a decent Philadelphia, a thriving Philadelphia, Philadelphia that can be, then we can focus on innovation and improving educational attainment and shorter work time and all the good stuff. So the bottom line is that, but it does start with we need this measure of economic justice, and this is the way to get there.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Helen Gill.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much to everybody who's in this room today. Not only because we are forcing the conversation, not just about poverty in our city, but about the conditions which actually keep people poor. This is not about a poverty that is inevitable, but about a poverty that is manufactured, much of it by some of our wealthiest individuals. And I think that's the story that we're hearing. This isn't just a story, though, about the conditions that we're living in, but about people who refuse to accept the status quo. And I think that that's what's most powerful about this room today, is that together this room has helped win some of the most expansive labor laws and protections in the country. We helped, together we helped make sure that the city's living wage law expanded to 2,000 additional service workers. So anyone who receives a tax subsidy in this city should not be paying poverty wages. Together, we're going to be talking about how to expand protections. You know, we work together to expand protections for 130,000 workers in private business, for the nation's largest retailers, food service, and hospitality corporations, to make sure they got a fair work week. And that was expansive and new, and that's why I'm so glad that the workers who are here today representing our next resolution on domestic workers are going to also be talking about the need for this council to demand that we take action on protecting domestic workers who allow so many families a stable working families environment here. And the most important lesson, I think, that both the people in this room, but also Minister and Steve, you have done really effectively, is remind council that we can't go on autopilot. Corporations, businesses, they're not going to do this of their own accord. This is not going to happen automatically. It's not going to happen out of, it's not about what's economically sensible. It's not about what's humane. It's really got to be a push. And we as a city council have to exercise the boundaries of our authority to make sure that they do it. That's why we stand with you. When you are going to face off with many of them, that we'll stand with you on picket lines, but we'll also stand with you when you're demanding the right to unionize. You won't be alone here, and we're going to tell people $7.25 is not a living wage, $9.50 is not a living wage, to the school district, $11 an hour is not a living wage, when this is what you're getting after 18 years working for business. So I'm proud to stand with the folks in this room. I want to thank Council Members Parker and Kenyatta Sanchez for being the primary sponsors of these resolutions and making sure that this hall resonates with the people's voices. But with Steve in particular, I'm curious about whether you've done any studies around Parkway Core and some of the others who are moving into development now. So I think that one of the interesting aspects is that as the parking lot companies start to move into more development-oriented endeavors, I'm deeply concerned that they are pulling in this quote-unquote savings that they may have from paying workers poverty wages in order to fund other endeavors that demand public subsidies, bring them in front of us for permits and uses. So I don't know if you've done some research on that. I know there are a couple of developments in and around the Center City area that I've been paying attention to.
So we did observe that some of the parking lot operators seem to operate parking lots in part or in some cases because they want to develop that land, right? So I think it's a very acute observation that actually gives you leverage over those folks. And the other thing I would say is, yeah, you would hate it if they were squeezing their workers in order to, then finance a development which gets a TIF or other kinds of, support from the taxpayers of the city. I think partly that's an illusion, because I think that squeezing these workers is not, in fact, going to make them buckets of additional money. This is a profitable industry if you pay workers decently. It's a profitable industry if you pay people poverty wages. And again, if you take wages out of competition, it's not going to disadvantage one parking operator versus another. So, again, we're happy to look more deeply into that, but I do think that gives you those. If some of those operators are going to be coming before you and they want something from you down the road, you might want to make them, remind them of that and encourage them to act in the interest of the city in this context too.
Yes, well, I will say, Madam Chair, that I know of at least 2 developments in and around the Center City area that are run by major parking lot owners who are looking to move very quickly into development. So I would encourage this council to be paying close attention to make sure that those parking lot developments do not get approved, especially when they're doing multi-million-dollar 29-story commercial developments, if they plan to profit off of people making less than a living wage in our city.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And just a notice to all of them, too. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee for this panel? Seeing none, I want to thank both of you so very
Thank
much
you.
for your testimony.
Thank you very much, Councilman.
Thank you.
The clerk will please call the next panel to testify on this resolution.
Gabe Morgan, William Harper, Daniel Turner, and Mike Hardaway.
I want to thank you all for being here. You feel free to proceed with your testimony, but just make sure that you state your name for the record as you begin.
William Harper. I have worked in the parking industry for 21 years. I am 54 years old and a proud father of two grown children. Despite working for M-Park for 18 years, I still only make $11.40 an hour with no meaningful benefits. After nearly 2 decades with the company, I don't even earn a living wage, and my pay does not keep up with the cost of living in the city of Philadelphia. We barely get raises. I get what they call a cost of living wage. The highest I ever got was 24 cents. As rent go up in the city, I can tell you that cost is going up a lot more than a dime and 4 pennies. In fact, I just lost my house that I was renting with my sister and my nephew. We are being forced to move because the bank is taking over the property. Now we have to find a place we can afford on short notice. It is getting harder to find a place in Philadelphia that is affordable on low wages. I already have trouble affording utilities, gas, electric. I have very little of any left after I pay my bills. I live paycheck to paycheck. If we won a living wage and benefits, my life would be a lot better. I like to help my daughter, and I could afford to do more. We are simply asking for a living wage and be treated with dignity on the job. I don't get to take designated breaks, and we don't have access to bathrooms. We are simply asking for, we work for companies that make a lot of money. I work at Penn's Landing and parking hundreds of cars a day at $20 a pop. We make sure that visitors that come for concert and festival have a good experience from the minute they park their car, from the moment they park their car. We help the customers and treat them well. The least the parking company could show is that they appreciate the work that we do. Thanks for hearing our concerns, and thank you, Councilwoman Parker, for your leadership.
Hello, my name is Michael Hardaway, and I live in West Philly. Until recently, I worked for the parking company Town Park. I worked long hours for low pay, but I came in every day and I did my job. I started speaking up for better pay, better working conditions, and for a union because I want a better life. I want to be able to pay my bills and lead a dignified life. I wanted my employer to listen to our concerns and improve things for me and my coworkers. But when Town Park started, I spoke at a rally to raise the wage for parking workers. They fired me. I feel like I was targeted for speaking up and I lost my job. I filed charges with the National Labor Relations Board. I wish I could say I was surprised, but this is not the first time I experienced poor treatment and bad working conditions. Working in these garages is hard work, and you're out in the heat and the cold. The fans in the circulating system do not always work. In fact, recently the circulation was down and debris from a neighboring construction site flew right into my eye. The company responded by saying I wasn't eligible for workers' comp. Before I worked in the parking industry, I worked at Walmart. I got a leg injury and experienced the same poor treatment. I thought that the parking industry, with all the money it brings in, would be better than Walmart, but it is not. Sorry. No problem. The parking industry makes a lot of money, and it gets away with paying their workers very little and treating us poorly. I was making $11 an hour because I was a cashier, but many of my coworkers made $7.25, some even less. Many of my coworkers are immigrants and are afraid to speak up. Many of my coworkers have families to support and are desperate to hold on to their jobs, or they will literally be out on the streets. This is especially wrong when you consider that the parking industry made $453 million in revenue last year. My coworkers and I want to make these good jobs. We do not want a handout. We are fighting to lift ourselves, and the profit should not depend on our poverty. I want to thank Councilwoman Cheryl Parker for her leadership and standing with us.
Good morning. My name is Daniel Turner. I am from Germantown. I work at a lot at 17th and Chancellor. I am a father of 3, working 2 jobs to try to make ends meet. When I took the job, I only did so because they promised good money. They made it seem like I would be making a nice bit of money. This was far from the case. I make a little over $10 an hour. It's not possible for me to do everything I need to do as a father with the pay I receive. I have 3 children to support, and I take that very seriously. My youngest daughter just turned 3 years old. I wanted to take her to Chuck E. Cheese for her birthday, but I had to cancel twice because I had to work to pay the bills. I haven't seen my daughter in 2 weeks because I work all the time. I should be able to make enough money to take a couple hours off to celebrate my daughter's birthday. But with the low wages of the park industry, I need to work every single available hour. I work 14 hours a day, every day, and I barely sleep. I don't know what else I can do. I often find myself feeling the effects of the depression due to not being able to do everything I need to do for my family. I'm actually taking antidepressants now. I often find myself looking for ways to make extra money without risking my freedom. Where I'm from, so many people are doing whatever they can to survive, selling drugs and various other crimes. I'm trying not to go that route, but with a job that pays this low, you can see why some people do it. Because of the horrible pay, I was forced to get a second job just to make ends meet, and it came at a cost. I really don't get to spend any time with my family, and I can no longer play semi-pro football due to having to work 7 days a week. What does it mean for our city if someone like me is doing everything they can possibly do and still isn't making it? Why shouldn't I be able to make enough money to take care of my family? I park cars in some of the most expensive buildings in the city for people who pay more to park than I make an hour. And I just had a few remarks of the working conditions at my parking lot. Starters, we have flying cockroaches the size of raffle tickets. We went 3 days without water, which I'm pretty sure is an OSHA violation. 2 days we had to bring in our own toilet paper. And for the past 2 weeks, I work 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which is overnight, and I'm by myself, no security. The camera system doesn't work. I've been there for a year. It's probably worked for the first month. No way to tell who's outside the gate or whatever. For the past 2 weeks, the gate has been broke, so it's been open. So that means anybody could come down there and do whatever they want to me. I emailed HR, I CC'd my manager, never got a response. For 2 weeks, the gate stayed like that. And it just seemed like my safety wasn't a priority. I just wanted to say thank you for 32 BJ for standing with us. And I wanted to thank Ms. Sherelle Parker for hearing us out. And thank you for City Council for also hearing us out.
Thank you. Before we hear from you, Gabe, I just want to note this for the record. The diversity in terms of age that is here today, adult children and younger children. In addition to that, I want the record to reflect that these are 3 men of color who are fully accepting the responsibility to take care of their families. You see, usually when you see black men or African men and we're talking about children and families, we're usually trying to beat them down over child support. But now, here today, you're here talking about getting access to the opportunity to be self-sufficient so that you can take care of your responsibilities as men. And I just needed to say that because that is what you stirred up on the inside. And in addition to that, we're talking about from Germantown to West Philly. So this is just not one, this is not one section, this is not one region, it's from every part of the city of Philadelphia. We have residents who are trying to hold on. And that's just extremely important. So I want to thank you for having the courage to just come up here and tell your stories. Thank you, Gabe. And Mr. Morgan now.
Sure. So my name is Gabe Morgan. I'm the Vice President of SEIU 32. You know, I had some prepared testimony, but I'm not going to give any of that. I think you guys have heard all of it already. I would say, Councilman Parker, one, thank you for holding these hearings. But my experience is what I see is a city all the time where men such as these are working hard every day for someone else who's making all the money and not paying them what they're worth. And this is a city and a country where that seems to be the fate of majority of working people. You know, you're hearing from us and you'll hear from domestic workers. And well, we could bring in industry after industry into this room where people are all being exploited, where they're working for billionaires, where they're working like parking attendants in the richest areas of the city, and they're not being paid enough to even see their children. This industry in Philadelphia, as folks said earlier, is it's a $500 million industry. It's a $40 billion industry nationally. It's comprised of international conglomerates and local developers and regional and national contractors. They have a national association. They have money. And it's not just one company that pays this or pays that. They all pay poverty wages because that's the way the industry is set up to work. They've constructed an industry that's based on the premise that they will make a bunch of money and hardworking gentlemen such as this will be poor no matter how much they work or how many hours they work. That's how parking works. And they do it in buildings that are the fanciest, shiniest, most publicly sometimes subsidized buildings in the city. It's whether you're at Temple or Penn or whether you're in Center City or whether you're at the stadium. This is how this industry works everywhere. And I know this council has seen this before because this is how contract cleaning used to work until the cleaners threatened to shut all the buildings down and council came out and supported them. And now they make as much as $19 an hour with family health insurance. And this was how contract security worked until the security officers went out and organized themselves and fought to try and shut everything down until council came out and supported them. And now that industry is moving towards $15 an hour in health insurance. And then there's the airport, which I know many people here were involved in. We have airport workers who are here today. And I would remind folks that to change that industry, all it took was a new city council, a new mayor, a new governor, and the workers going on strike 5 times. But now, there are 2,000 contracted airport workers who are moving towards $15 an hour, health insurance, have a union. We will get them to where they need to go over time. That's what the council has been trying to do here. You guys have been trying to address the greed of corporate America, or more specifically, corporate Philly, by finding ways to try and offset that, whether it's fair scheduling, prevailing wage, which was the expansion of it to service sector workers, which is one of the first things that did that, the 21st century wage. These are all things this council has done to try and address this problem. I think what we know in 32BJ, where we've come to Philly, have always been in Philly, but have now organized 20,000 workers in Philly, have become the biggest private sector union in Philly all over the past 10 years. I think what we've learned is it takes the following things if you want to change how an industry works. First of all, it takes brave workers like these. It takes workers who are ready to fight. At the end of the day, you will only get what you fight for. But when you fight, and I think that's what we've experienced, you need that fight. And then you need a city council that's willing to step in where this state will not, as you know better than most. Look, you can't look at the federal government and think they're going to do anything for workers right now. You need a city government that knows that the people who are the hardest working, most underpaid people are their own constituents, who are going to step in on their behalf and figure out what they can do to help with that fight. And I think that's what we're asking for here in this industry. You know, the council working with workers who are both working and fighting for themselves, and a mayor who has been there with them now, this mayor, have really transformed 3 of the biggest service sector industries in the city. And those are all industries now, contract cleaning, security, the airport, that are now on their way to becoming very good working class jobs over time. Parking is next. There's thousands of parking lot attendant workers. And with your support, no one can beat these workers. You can't hold people like this down unless the system is trying to hold you down. But if the system and folks who represent it step in and help, then they will win. And these will be another 2,000 workers that'll be on the path to $15, $16, $17 an hour, like most of the 32BJ members in this room. So that's what we're asking you to do, is work with us, work with these workers over time to change this industry in the way that you've done it with other industries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, we want to thank each of you for your testimony. Let me just say, as the sponsor of this resolution, and I'm sure all of my colleagues would agree with this sentiment, after hearing what we've heard on the public record today, it is my hope that the industry will pay very attention, very, very, very close attention to what you've heard today. The pressure won't stop. The push won't stop. The fight won't stop. But you know, you can do the right thing on your own. Now, because ultimately for me, because I've served for 10 years in a place called Harrisburg, and I had to figure out a way to get some things done with some people who I disagreed with 99.9% of the time. It is my hope that the industry just listen. And if you listen, we strongly encourage you to find a way to reach out and do what's right. If you want to come up with an amicable solution, we're here to listen. So I don't want anybody to be able to say, who paid attention to this hearing, that we did not extend an olive branch to have a conversation. And I want you, as the leader, Mr. Morgan, to just be able to note and state for the record, we were at the hearing and we heard an olive branch being extended to the industry to have the conversation. Because if it doesn't, we will continue to be with you and stand with you in this fight. Thank you all so very much for your testimony. There are no more questions or comments for this panel. We want to thank you so very much for your testimony. Is there anyone else who is here who wishes to testify on this resolution? If there's no one else, we're going to move to the next resolution. This is resolution number 190193, and we want to call up the first panel to testify for it, but I also want the sponsor, our colleague, Councilwoman Kenyatta Sanchez, who is taking the lead on this issue to make some comments. And so as we see folks leaving the chamber now, once we slow down, I'm then going to ask the clerk to read the title of the resolution. Interpreter for this panel. Okay.
And
thank you for getting the interpreter. Yeah.
yeah, it was really do you want the interpreter to interpret all of them or just the Spanish?
No, well,
ones?
yeah, I think there's only one. Maria, I think, is the one that needs the interpreter, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's only one
but
person.
she'll sit with them and kind of interpret as things are going on. Because it'd be great if, like, yeah, she can. Okay. Yeah, it's the first time that they've ever.
The language access, we need to have it.
Great.
This is the guinea pig period.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, the parking folks, they need to get with it. Boma figured it out. They got to figure it out. You can't have a business model that, especially, let me tell you, those African men get treated like shit. So their security guard, their parking attendant, their maintenance people.
And they're in Long Press and Long Deal.
Oh,
and
yeah. That 35th over there. You can see them in the uniforms. This is another industry where African women in particular are being taken advantage of.
started with our women, with African American women. I'm going to ask the clerk to please read the title of the resolution.
Resolution number 190193, a resolution authorizing the Committee on Labor and Civil Service to hold hearings to examine labor standards for domestic workers throughout the city of Philadelphia.
Will the clerk please call up the first panel to testify on the resolution, and when they get here, we want them to state their name for the record and, of course, proceed with their testimony. But right now, we want to hear from the leader in this city council who has made this issue a priority, Councilwoman Kenyatta Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for hosting and allowing us to tell, as I said earlier, the Philadelphia story. And the women who will come before us will tell a much better story than I can, but I particularly want to thank the administration and labor standards. You know, lifting industry workers out of poverty is a long journey. We have to get the information on the record, as we did earlier today with the parking industry, with the domestic workers. There is a movement afoot across the country to lift hardworking people out of poverty. That doesn't happen in isolation, as Gabe Morgan spoke to earlier. It is really about organizing, people coming forward and not being intimidated or scared to tell their stories, and for fighting sometimes for other workers in the fight for the airport, security workers. There are many people who ended up losing their jobs and ultimately did not even benefit from their hard work. But the purpose and the intent was bigger than all of them. And I want to personally thank all of the women in particular who've come forward to tell us their stories, some of them very painful, emotional, and traumatic, as we try to bring this industry out of the shadows of people's homes and treat this sector with the dignity that it deserves. People who take care of other people's children and loved ones when their own families cannot. And so I want to thank everyone who's collaborated with us until now. Look forward to working with the administration about how we move forward in a very intentional way to support all of these workers. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Will the first panel?
Rich Laser and Rue Landau.
Both of you just please state your name for the record and then begin your testimony.
Yeah, sure. Good morning. Good morning, Chair Parker, members of the committee. My name is Rich Laser, and I'm the Deputy Mayor for Labor. And I'm here to appear before you to testify on resolution number 190193. This resolution authorizes council to hold this hearing today to examine labor standards for domestic workers in the city of Philadelphia. On behalf of the mayor and the whole administration, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of domestic workers. The resolution rightly calls attention to the fact that domestic workers are excluded from many local, state, and federal labor protections, including minimum wages, overtime protections, freedom from gender and racial discrimination, and right to organize as a union. As a result, domestic workers have long faced job insecurity, wage theft, harassment, discrimination, and other workplace abuses. These challenges would impact any worker, but they are even more pronounced in the case of domestic workers, who are overwhelmingly women and immigrants living paycheck to paycheck. The Kenny administration believes that the struggles of domestic workers are a serious issue that deserve our attention. We've all heard the statistic that Philadelphia has the highest poverty rate of any largest city in the U.S. Far too many domestic workers are living that statistic and working hard every day but not getting ahead. We believe that making good on our support of domestic workers is a foundational step towards moving the needle of poverty in this city. Since we cannot hope to turn our poverty numbers around while an entire industry of 16,000 or more workers goes unregulated, underpaid, and is left open to discrimination and harassment. To that end, we have been meeting for several months with domestic worker advocates and workers themselves, drilling into the details of what legislative and policy changes we would look like. We look forward to partnering with council later in this legislative session to establish a Domestic Workers Bill of Rights that provides for needed workplace protections to every hardworking domestic worker in this great city. Once again, I'd like to thank council for holding this hearing, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And Ms. Landau, I'm just going to ask that we just have a little detour because one of the members of our second panel has to leave. So, and both of you please remain seated. I'm just going to ask Ms. Batanya Shepard of the Pennsylvania Domestic Workers Alliance if she could come up to the table now. Thank you, Rue. Thank you. Just please state your name for the record.
Muy buenos días, mi nombre es Betania Shepard, soy dominicana y tengo 9 años viviendo en Filadelfia. Trabajo en limpieza de casas, tengo 4 años como trabajadora limpiando casas. Soy una líder con la Alianza de Trabajadoras del Hogar en Pensilvania y estoy aquí pidiendo su apoyo para la Carta de Derechos de las Trabajadoras del Hogar y más justicia para nosotras.
Good morning. My name is Bethania Shepard. I'm Dominican, and I've been in Philadelphia for 9 years, and I work as a house cleaner. I've been a cleaner for 4 years. I'm a leader with the Pennsylvania Domestic Workers Alliance, and I'm here in support of the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights and winning more justice for all of us.
He tenido muchas malas experiencias. Me han pagado muy poco y algunos jefes también me han tratado mal y con groserías. En una ocasión, yo tuve que mover el autobús de la escuela de mis niños para otra dirección porque me recogían bastante lejos de mi casa. Tenía una niña pequeña, tenía que levantarme muy temprano para llegar hasta ese lugar y pagar para que me cuidaran a mi niña pequeña. Luego ella me recogía muy tarde, limpiábamos una sola casa y cuando yo le decía que eso no me convenía, ella me hablaba muy grosero. Me hablaba con grosería y me dice, no, a mí tampoco me conviene eso. Luego me puso a trabajar en más casas y me pagó menos. Entonces me pagó menos y cuando yo le reclamé, ella me dijo que me buscara otra persona. Búscate otra persona que te pague mejor. Entonces eso para mí fue muy, muy doloroso, muy incómodo. Yo me estaba esforzándome mis niños y yo, y ella no lo valoró.
I've had a lot of very bad experiences. I've been paid really poorly and by my bosses who have also been extremely rude to me. In one of my jobs, I lived really far away from work and I had to get up really early and to take my kids to someone else's house so that they could get to school. We had to pay for transportation and I had to pay for someone to take care of my kids so that they could get a good education and I could get to work. I would wait for that boss on the street in the cold for hours, and she would only give me one job and I was paid very, very little. When I spoke up and said that I needed more work and that I should be paid better, she said, well then just go get a job where someone's gonna pay you more. And this was extremely painful for me and my kids who had uprooted our lives in order for me to be able to work.
En otros trabajos también me han tratado diferente por ser latina. En uno hubo una ocasión que alguien entró y parece que robaron y la única que era latina era yo y a mí fue la única que me prohibieron la entrada donde estaban todos los utensilios para la limpieza.
In other jobs, I've been discriminated against because I'm Latina. In one of the apartments I cleaned, someone had entered the basement where the cleaning equipment is kept and stole many things. Even though I had nothing to do with the robbery and there are other cleaners with access to this basement, I'm now the only one who's denied entry to the basement to access cleaning equipment, and I'm also the only Latina that works there.
En mi trabajo actual tengo 2 años en el mismo edificio de apartamentos. Mis jefes ponen mis horas, precios y todo lo que tengo que hacer. Ellos ponen todo y a causa de eso, legalmente, debo ser su empleada, pero me califican como contratista independiente. Ellos lo hacen para pagar, para que yo tenga menos beneficios y nada para protegerme en el trabajo y también para que ellos paguen menos impuestos. Eso es otra forma de abuso.
I've worked cleaning apartments in the same building for the past 2 years. My bosses decide my hours, pay, and work duties. They decide everything, and because of this, legally I should be considered an employee, but I'm classified as an independent contractor. They do this to deny me benefits, deny me of my worker protections, and so that they can pay fewer taxes. This is another form of abuse.
Yo no tengo nada de beneficios, no tengo contrato por escrito, vacaciones ni tiempo pagado por enfermedad. También la ciudad de Filadelfia tengo muy pocos derechos legales y por eso estoy luchando para la Carta de Derechos para las trabajadoras del hogar.
I don't have any benefits. I don't have a written contract, vacation, or paid sick time. In addition, in the city of Philadelphia, I have few legal rights, and this is why I'm fighting for a domestic worker bill of rights.
La causa más importante para mí es que tengamos un respaldo y un pago y un pago para cuando hay discriminación o amenazas. Ahora, si levantamos la voz cuando nos hagan amenaza, porque muchos somos indocumentados y necesitamos un apoyo real y legal para que eso no nos pueda pasar. Necesitamos pago justo, horas justas, beneficios y protecciones contra represalias.
The most important thing to me is that we have support and someone who has our backs when we experience discrimination and threats. Now, if we raise our voices when we're not paid, bosses threaten us because many of us are undocumented. We need real and legal support so that this can't happen. We need fair pay, fair hours, benefits, and protection against against threats around our immigration. Retaliation is the word in English.
Nuestras compañeras en otro estado ya han tenido protecciones y ya es la hora de que nosotras tengamos también. Por eso estamos aquí pidiendo su apoyo y gracias por escucharme.
Our fellow workers in other states already have these protections, and it's time we have them as well. This is why we're here today, seeking your support. Thank you for listening to me.
We know for the record that you do have to go, and I want to say again to the administration, Ms. Landau, thank you so very much for your patience. We greatly appreciate it. As I'm listening to your testimony, Ms. Shepherd, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie The Help. Have you all ever heard of the movie The Help? I'm listening to your testimony. My grandmother and many other black women were the help in the South. It is how they made sure that their children and their grandchildren could get access to opportunities because they didn't want them to be the help, to get treated the way they did down south. Now, I'm talking about very, very early on. I'm talking about in the 40s and in the 50s. And to hear you describe that same treatment still taking place today. And we're not talking about the South. We're talking about the North. This is the North. Although people still call us up South. I don't know if you've ever heard that before. Philadelphia being up South. I want to thank you for your courage. I also want to thank you for pointing out an issue that is impacting your industry, because when I've raised it, people only think that we're talking about the construction industry. And you identified something called the misclassification of employees. It's when an employer, instead of identifying you as a full-time employee so that they don't have to pay you the benefits, pay into the unemployment compensation and everything that a full-time employee would be eligible for, they classify you as an independent contractor. And I've experienced it a lot in my district when non-union contractors come into work into communities, particularly immigrant communities, where there is not the ability to speak English fluently. And so I want to thank you for noting that we've got to continue to tackle misclassification of employees, because it doesn't just impact the construction industry, it's also impacting the domestic worker industry. I want to thank you so very much for your courage being here today. And Councilwoman Sanchez, let me just state for the record that I thank you for bringing up an issue that is dear to my heart, not because I had to read a white paper and or a stat, but the matriarchs of my family, that's how they sent me to college, right? Because they were the help. So I thank you so very much for bringing up the issue. Councilwoman Sanchez, before Mrs. Shepherd has to go, you want to make any comments or questions? Thank you.
Gracias también.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Landau and Mr. Laser.
Council people, if you don't mind for 1 second, before Ms. Shepherd has to go, I'd like to just make a statement for all of the members of the Domestic Workers Alliance, including her, to just make sure that everyone knows that domestic workers do have rights in Philadelphia. They do have rights to be free from discrimination.
Rue, I'm just going to ask if you, can the translator just go back over to Mrs. Shepherd so that she, as Lou is, because this message that Rue is given, she definitely wants her to hear it. So if you could just find a way to take a seat next to her. She's coming another. And if you want to, you can come up to the table to translate so everyone can hear you on the record.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. Rue.
Oh, no, thank you. I just want to make sure that Ms. Shepherd knows, as well as all the other domestic workers here, that they do have rights in Philadelphia. There are laws that make that employers cannot discriminate or harass domestic workers on the job.
Antes de que la señora Shepherd salga, quiero que todos sepan que sí hay derechos, algunos para las trabajadoras del hogar en Filadelfia, que los empleadores no deben discriminar contra las trabajadoras en el trabajo.
And also, we at the Commission on Human Relations do not unilaterally accept employers' positions that employees are independent contractors. It is a difficult legal analysis and rubric to put somebody into that category of independent contractors. We fight against that. We have won. We have rejected employers' categorization of employees as independent contractors in the past, and they would have to prove that they are indeed under law independent contractors to make them not responsible for the mistreatment of their workers.
I believe that the official interpreter is interpreting for the Spanish speakers. So I think we're okay on that.
Councilwoman, just a quick note. While the translator, do not leave for 1 second. I just wanted to say to Ms. Shepherd, and if you can translate that to her, my Spanish isn't very good, to say, I know it takes great courage to speak before a group.
Councilman, I know you want Ms. Shepherd to hear your comments, so let's.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you for the.
Sure.
El señor Taubenberger quiere reconocer el valor de la señora Shepherd de hablar aquí hoy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it takes great courage to come here and speak forward in a language that is otherwise not normally or many times used. It should be used a lot more. And that comes also from personal experience. When I was a little boy, I did not speak English very well. I think I do okay now, but the fact is that you're here is very important because it gives us all a better understanding, and I thank you for that courage.
Le doy las gracias por llegar aquí hoy a hablar con nosotros. Demuestra mucho valor haber hablado de esta situación en un idioma, en frente de gente que habla en un idioma que es segunda para usted. Yo cuando era niño no hablaba inglés bien, entonces aprecio mucho su valor en llegar a hablar, a testificar aquí hoy.
Madam Chair, thank you, and Ms. Shepherd, gracias.
Gracias, señora Shepherd.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great, thank you. So, Chairperson Parker, and members of the Labor and Civil Service Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Resolution 190193, examining labor standards for domestic workers in Philadelphia. I am Rue Landau, Executive Director of the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations. The Commission is a city agency that administers and enforces the Fair Practices Ordinance, the law that prohibits discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations, and the delivery of city services in Philadelphia. So just a quick little history lesson for you. The original Fair Practices Ordinance that was enacted in 1963 was limited in scope compared to the expansive civil rights laws we have today. It protected employees from discrimination in a small number of categories: race, color, religion, national origin, and ancestry. And it carefully defined who was considered an employer and what constituted employment. Notably, the original Fair Practices Ordinance exempted all domestic workers so that no protections from discrimination were available to them or others employed in a personal or confidential capacity. Over the years, the ordinance was amended to expand protections to include additional vulnerable categories such as sexual orientation, gender identity, breastfeeding mothers, and victims of domestic violence. But still, it did not include domestic workers. This continued until 2011, when my team and I worked with the city's law department to overhaul the Fair Practices Ordinance, resulting in an amendment that included domestic workers. This amendment expanded protections to prohibit harassment and on-the-job discrimination of domestic workers, but still exempted them from hiring and firing practices. Specifically, it exempted an employer to express It allowed employer to express a preference in the hiring or firing of an individual as a domestic worker or in a personal or confidential capacity from unlawful discrimination practices. The basis for the exclusion was in response to public input from families who wanted to hire caregivers who matched their cultural and language backgrounds. For example, if a Latinx family wanted to hire a Spanish-speaking nanny for their child, or a Chinese-American family needed to hire a Mandarin-speaking caregiver for their non-English-speaking parent, they could do that. This exclusion was intended to allow for cases like this. As our society and economy continues to change, including additional protections for domestic workers in the Fair Practices Ordinance is essential. The FPO provides for many types of monetary relief, including penalties, and authorizes the Commission to issue an order directing a respondent employer who is engaged in an unlawful employment practice to take affirmative action to redress the harms suffered by the complainant. Looking at the exclusion now in 2019, we think it could be improved. The PCHR is supportive of legislation that strengthens protections for domestic workers across our city, and we are currently working with the law department to draft language that will enhance these protections while remaining considerate of the hiring and firing exclusion as it applies to a worker with certain cultural or language backgrounds. Philadelphia should join other cities and states that are responding to the need for stronger rights for domestic workers. Being at the forefront of change often begins with city-level legislation that expands through statewide strategy for expansion. Cities like New York and Seattle responded to the campaign of a growing coalition of grassroots organizations consisting of domestic workers and ally organizations. The Pennsylvania Domestic Workers Alliance is gaining the support of area unions and community organizations and estimates that 16,000 to 19,000 domestic workers will be impacted by changes in Philadelphia's Fair Practices Ordinance. Philadelphia has always been a leader in civil rights legislation for vulnerable populations, a trend that we should continue by strengthening civil rights protections for the city's domestic workers. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to take any questions.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you, Rue, for the history lesson around it. And I appreciate the administration's work on this. I know that we're trying to figure out the how, what it looks like, without overcommitting to what we can do here. In your discussions around some of these exclusion pieces, what do you see to be kind of the obstacle to get us to where we want to go?
Honestly, the obstacle I see that you should be able to have an exclusion for hiring, so you can choose somebody who meets a cultural and language background. The firing piece is funny, but also makes sense. If you hired somebody based on their language background so they can speak to your parent and then spoke English the entire time, you should be able to fire them for not using that special gift that you hired them for. And so that's kind of the nuance of the exclusion that we're trying to get around. And it's complicated, but it does feel funny to keep the word firing in there, but it also makes sense in limited circumstances. I will say that I have brilliant commissioners as well as a brilliant staff. And the truth is, we are the enforcers of this law, and we know what the intention is. And if you bring the wrong case to us, we'll be able to sniff that out. So we know that we want to do the right thing, even with limitations that exist now, and we'll see if there's a way to enhance it. But, you know, you've got our commitment that we know that the spirit of the law is there in order to provide the most protections and also to provide the extra special cultural and language backgrounds for families.
We appreciate that because it's always in the nuance, right? It's the spirit and the operationalizing of what we're trying to do. And so, you know, I love me some Rue. So Rue always finds the way, not the no. So I appreciate your work, and I look forward to working with you and Deputy Mayor Laser as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for this too.
Thank you. And Rue, I want to say too, also thank you for the history lesson, because I did not know that it was actually the Human Relations Commission that had made these adjustments to ensure that domestic workers were actually included. With that being said, tell me, if you will, based on work that we've seen in other regions who have already done this, what does enforcement look like in other areas? Like, I don't know. How are they enforcing it?
I'm not sure exactly, and I bet the Domestic Workers Alliance will be able to do this, but let me tell you why we added it in. When I first got to the commission in 2008, we kept seeing cases that we couldn't take based on many limitations of the law. And the one I remember, the reason why we knew we had to include domestic workers was there's a husband and wife. Wife is disabled in a wheelchair, and they got a caregiver to come in and take care of the wife. I believe she was Caribbean, she was Black Caribbean, and when she got there, the husband started to racially harass her. And she couldn't take it anymore, and she had to quit that job. And she came to file a complaint with us, and based on that blanket exclusion that we didn't take any domestic workers or people in a personal or confidential capacity, we couldn't take her case. And that was outrageous, and we knew it. And so when we knew we were doing the overhaul, we had to make that change, that when you're on the job, you should be free from discrimination, you should be free from harassment, you're allowed to do your job without experiencing all of these harms and injustices. And now anybody who is experiencing that can come and file a complaint with us.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gim.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. The question is for Mr. Laser. So, you know, the Fair Workweek law allowed for a budgetary allotment for
Yes.
2 additional employees
Correct.
within your office. Is
Correct.
that correct? Should we move forward on expanding protections for domestic workers? Do you anticipate that some of their work could go towards education and outreach?
Yeah, definitely. I think
So-
the biggest piece of the budget increase is definitely for education and outreach. I think that's where we were lacking. And every year, this council always helps me, and we grow that office. So if we take this on, I think education and outreach is going to be one of the number one issues that we're going to have to take care of.
Great. And then, I think I'm going to just jump ahead with some of NDWA's testimony, but New York established a domestic worker legal clinic, doing a collaborative enforcement model between government agencies and CBOs. So, I think we need to discuss that a little bit, in part because this is about wage theft, paid sick, fair work week, pay equity. Can we be clear on that? Pay equity, and potentially domestic workers' Bill of Rights. So those types of things, I think, are critically important in order to educate people about their rights, but also to let employers know that we're serious about enforcement and enforcement action. So as you're evolving that, is that something you're willing to have a conversation about?
Definitely.
Thank you.
We need all the help we can get.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Will the chair call the next panel?
Allison Julian, Janet Ginsburg, Maria del Carmen Diaz, and Erica Almiron.
Why do I know that?
Me arrimo, no se apure.
Thank you. Just please state your name for the record.
Buenos días, soy María del Carmen Díaz y vengo de México. Trabajo aquí desde hace 24 años.
So a rhythm. We want you, the interpreter, to come and have a seat at the table and take the other microphone. And we want to thank all of you here in the chambers for your patience, and each of you, because this is the first time that we have actually used an interpreter, and so we're setting some history here today, right, on how we're supposed to get this right. Okay?
Gracias por su paciencia a todas, porque es la primera vez que tienen una intérprete aquí en el concilio. Entonces le voy a, sorry, en inglés ahora.
Sí.
Hello, I'm Maria del Carmen Diaz, and I'm from Mexico, and I've been working here in Philadelphia for 24 years.
Soy miembro de la Alianza de Trabajadoras del Hogar en Pensilvania y vengo representando a las 16,000 trabajadoras domésticas del hogar que están en esta ciudad. Aunque aún somos una organización nueva como la única organización de trabajadoras del hogar en todo el estado de Pensilvania, estamos luchando fuertemente para mejorar las condiciones laborales para nosotras las trabajadoras domésticas.
I'm a member of the Pennsylvania Domestic Workers Alliance, and I'm here representing 16,000 domestic workers in our city. Even though we are a new organization as the only domestic worker organization in Pennsylvania, we are fighting to improve our labor conditions as domestic workers.
Hoy en día estamos en todos lados, en todos los hogares de ustedes, y es tiempo que nosotras luchemos, que alcemos la voz, que salgamos de donde estamos y que nos tomen en cuenta, porque somos como parientes de ustedes. Eso es lo que somos, y queremos una carta de derechos que nos apoye, que nos dé más valor, más protecciones sobre todo.
We are throughout the city working in your homes, and in the silence and the shadows, we take care of your children and care for your parents and grandparents. We're almost like parents to you. We want to have the same rights, and we are raising our voices to have a domestic worker bill of rights because we all deserve dignity, respect, and equality.
Como yo tengo 24 años, yo no quiero decir muy bien esto de que está aquí escrito. Yo tengo muchos años de experiencia, yo cuido niños, cuido viejitos, bueno, gente de la tercera edad, y he tenido demasiadas experiencias. Un poco.
I don't want to read what's written here. I want to tell you from my heart. I've worked here for 24 years. I have a lot of experience taking care of children and people that I would say are of the third age, and the experiences I've had.
Lo siento, pero he pasado por muchas cosas.
I'm sorry, I've gone through a lot of things.
Mucha gente no me ha pagado así, después de que trabajo les digo ya terminé y me salen con que no te pago porque me estoy divorciando, y digo, pero yo no me estoy divorciando.
I've had people say, I can't pay you. I finished the job, and then they say, I'm sorry, I can't pay you. I'm getting divorced. And I say, but I'm not getting divorced.
Y ahorita me suena cómico, pero cuando uno te hacen las cosas así de frente, dices, ¿qué pasa aquí?
And, you know, like now we're laughing about it, but when it happens to you at that moment, you say, what's going on here?
Mucha gente me ha dicho, solo te voy a pagar esto porque en México es mucho. Y le digo, ¿dónde está tu casa?
And sometimes people will say, I'm just going to pay you this because this is a lot of money in Mexico. And I say, well, where's your house?
Es como ridículo.
It's ridiculous.
Y luego en Chestnut Hill, yo trabajé muchísimo ahí y solo me contrataban, me tenían por mi disque colorcito de piel.
I've worked in Chestnut Hill, and they, ¿y qué? ¿Por qué? ¿Qué?
Por mi color de piel me tenían.
And they had me on. They had it on me because of the color of my skin.
Y ahora sí lo leo.
Now I'm going to read.
Estamos luchando en esta alianza en Filadelfia porque Filadelfia es una ciudad ahora muy grande, próspera, ya hay mucha tecnología y todo, y creo que es tiempo que ya pues, como relativamente salgamos del closet. Ay, Dios mío, mucha atención en los-
We're, as an alliance, we're fighting here in Philadelphia because Philadelphia is now a prosperous, modern city, and it's time for us domestic workers to come out of the closet.
Agradezco infinitamente a todos ustedes su apoyo que nos están dando y seguiré trabajando porque ya pronto me retiro también.
We appreciate all of the support that you're giving us, and we're going to keep working because I'm hoping to retire soon.
Agradezco a todos los presentes aquí por tanto apoyo, a las concejalas, muchas gracias. Y juntos haremos la diferencia para obtener dignidad, respeto y derechos.
I appreciate the council and everyone who is present here today, and I hope that together we will achieve dignity, respect, and rights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Allison Julian, and I'm the co-founder, one of the co-founders of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, the leading voice for the 2.5 million domestic workers in the United States. We have 65 affiliate organizations, including the Pennsylvania Domestic Workers Alliance. For over 25 years, I worked as a professional nanny and was a key leader in the 7-year campaign to win the New York Domestic Worker Bill of Rights in 2010, the first in this country. I am here today to speak in support of Philadelphia's 16,000 domestic workers and the critical need for the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. Domestic workers do the most important work, the work that makes all other work possible, allowing others to go to work with the peace of mind, knowing that their children and elderly parents and homes are safe. Despite this, Black and brown women under the New Deal era were systematically excluded from major labor laws. We are not all afforded the same economic stability, safety, and dignity at work. These exclusions are rooted in a legacy of slavery and racism. Over the last 8 years, the National Domestic Workers Alliance has successfully passed Bill of Rights in 8 states, including the city of Seattle. And I just want to update this. As of last week, we had 9 states. New Mexico became state number 9. The New York Bill of Rights secured the floor for domestic workers. We have seen a dramatic improvement in working conditions since our victory. Across the city and state, domestic workers are getting paid time off to take care of themselves and their family members when they're sick. More employers are coming into compliance with paying overtime, and domestic work is increasingly seen and treated as real work. In New York, we have established a domestic worker legal clinic based on co-enforcement model between government agencies and community organizations. As a part of our legal clinic, we run targeted outreach strategies to educate hundreds of domestic workers about their rights each year. And we've screened them for potential workplace violations that can be enforced. Many workers have worked with us to file their wage theft claims and send demand letters to employers. In the last 3 years, we have recovered more than $500,000 in stolen wages for workers. At the same time, the domestic workers are becoming more deeply involved in the National Domestic Workers Alliance and supporting each other to better navigate the industry. None of this would have been possible without the New York Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. Our national movement is following Philadelphia's progress to pass legislation that can become a standard bearer across the country. This can be accomplished by learning from the challenges of 2 key areas: enforcement for the law and winning paid time off for all domestic workers. In New York, we're still organizing to make sure there are clear ways to hold employers accountable when the laws are violated. Like Seattle, we believe in enacting a domestic worker standards enforcement board within our legislation is a critical way to ensure the law is upheld. Providing paid time off for all domestic workers is another way for Philadelphia to become a nation's leader. Domestic work is hard work and oftentimes cause physical strain on the workers' bodies. Every worker deserves time off without fear of not making rent or getting evicted. It requires innovation to provide benefits for domestic workers who work more than 60 hours a week for many employers. Commitment to exploring a citywide portable benefit system and expanding paid sick leave to full-time and part-time workers will provide enormous material gains for domestic workers and cement Philadelphia's leadership on worker justice issues. Today, I am proud to stand strongly with my sisters in the Philadelphia and Pennsylvania Domestic Workers Alliance to bring the movement for domestic workers' justice to the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. Thank you so much for your time.
Good afternoon, members of council. My name is Erica Almiron. I just wanted to speak a little bit on my experience and also, I'm just gonna start. This is a very personal issue to me. So my name is Erica and I've been an activist and social justice organizer for 20 years. The last 8 years of that has been as the executive director of Juntos. But I'm not actually here to talk about my time as an executive director because this is actually an issue that is way closer to me. Some of my earliest memories actually in my life, I can almost say from the time I was about 3 years old, were actually in some of the luxury high-rise apartments that my mom would clean. I would usually, when she was cleaning the kitchen, I would be in the dining room or on the table coloring books. When she would be in the bathroom, I would be the one that would sit with her and she would try to teach me how to read. That was like earliest memories of my childhood. I then went on in high school and my mother at that point would help other women to find jobs. It was actually, she would have a kind of a pseudo support network of women who were domestic workers, and when they would first come to the country, they knew to come to my mother to look for work. And she would find them jobs, and she would help them learn a little bit of English just so that they could survive in the workforce. And she would also be the one that would get the calls if the households were abusive. So also in my high school years, I remember riding with my mother in a car several times in the middle of the night to pick up women from homes, many of them up on the main line or in Chestnut Hill. And the only way for them to escape some of these abusive behaviors were to be basically secretly ridden off in the middle of the night. I then also, during my parents are still domestic workers. They wanted to come today and couldn't because they were actually cleaning houses this morning. And so in my high school years, when they started doing more domestic work, I would frequently help them. So I myself have cleaned houses. I have also served as a nanny. A lot of my 20s, it's actually how we paid for my first year of college, was in domestic work. And then I just kind of want to give you the full breadth of the experience is that in the last 8 years, as the executive director of Juntos, I actually spent many hours talking to women who would come in about all of the ways that they experienced abuse as domestic workers. Some cases were so excruciatingly painful that I could only describe them as indentured servitude or slavery. And I think there was a lot already that has been said around the purposeful exclusion of domestic workers and agricultural workers in labor laws in the 30s that can only be attributed to racism and the effects of the hate actually on Black and brown and immigrant women and men in this country. I'm actually coming because I've spent a lot of time talking to family members, loved ones, and community members about how important this is here in Philadelphia, of the 16,000 workers and families who are impacted by this, and of what we could actually do. And I actually created a little list. I don't know if it matches, but this is my dream list of ways that we could support domestic workers. I think that we should have a Bill of Rights that ensures domestic workers receive overtime pay for over 40 hours. I have seen many times women will work and then hours get added at the end of the day. Can you do my laundry? Can you pick up my kid from school? Can you do this? And an 8-hour day all of a sudden turns into a 12 to 13-hour day. Those hours are not paid for. I've actually seen where women are then in-house nannies and they're staying in the house and now they're waking up in the middle of the night to take care of children, and these are hours that are not compensated for. I think that we should have advanced noticing of scheduling. A lot of the women will get to a situation where the day before or the day of, they'll get canceled on and then not get paid, and that's money that they're expecting. So it goes both ways. It's either too many hours or the hours are cut, really abruptly. Written agreement with employers, I think, are valid and important to make sure that their contracts and people know exactly what the expectations are. That we guarantee them a living wage. I think sometimes for the hours that we see them working, many women who do this kind of work actually make less than minimum wage. Paid days off, including sick leave and personal days. Many times families don't get days off, women don't get days off. Health insurance. My father had gotten lung cancer as a domestic worker, and we had no health insurance, and we had to figure out how to navigate that. And my mother now, she's in her 60s and has to have her knees replaced after all those years of bending down and cleaning. So health insurance, retirement benefits, and any recourse against sexual harassment and any kind of discrimination. I think these are just things that I think are a dream list and I think are important to kind of highlight. I wish my mother could have been here with you guys today for you guys to hear from her directly. She can't, so I'm going to be the voice for her and for all of the women that I've experienced and lived with all of my life who have done this work. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you to the women who have taken the time to introduce this, Councilwoman Gim, Sanchez, and Parker. Thank you.
Good afternoon already. Good afternoon, members of City Council. Thank you for the opportunity of having me come speak with you today about this important and underserved segment of the Philadelphia community. My name is Janet Ginsberg, and I'm a senior staff attorney at Community Legal Services in the Employment Unit. The Employment Unit at CLS represents low-income Philadelphians in a variety of job-related issues, such as discrimination, wage claims, family medical leave, disability benefits, and barriers to employment, such as criminal records and child abuse records. Among the many employment problems we see in the low-wage workforce are those confronted by individuals, mainly women, who work in other people's homes, working as housekeepers, nannies, cooks. They provide valuable, even essential services to others and provide important contributions to the city of Philadelphia's economy and prosperity. However, despite the essential nature of their work, domestic workers are a particularly vulnerable segment of our economy, due in part to the power imbalance in the employment relationship and exacerbated by their isolation and causing their work to be mostly invisible. For this reason, Community Legal Services is very pleased to see City Council addressing this issue and are honored to be able to participate in helping to create this, whatever great new framework we can create. Domestic workers are often women, immigrants, and people of color. Since their work is often solitary and inside of private homes, they are more isolated from other workers and the general public than most of our clients are. While all workers are at risk of being mistreated, of not being paid for the work that they've done, of being harassed, of having their schedules rearranged without notice, domestic workers, in part due to their isolation, are less aware of what rights they have to redress wrongs that are done to them. Indeed, unfortunately, in many cases, they have even fewer rights under state and federal labor laws than most other workers. Due to the informal nature of their work, they have no safety net to fall back on in case of job loss, as the households employing them are not contributing to unemployment comp or workers' comp system, leaving the worker more dependent on the job and less likely to make a complaint of wage theft, sexual harassment, etc. Some are further dependent on the job for housing. We have seen domestic workers exploited because of their vulnerability or perceived vulnerability. Through coalitions representing domestic workers and through our experience representing domestic workers over the years, we have identified some of the areas most in need of attention for domestic workers. First, pay. Domestic work tends to be among the lowest paid work in our region. Domestic workers in Philadelphia earn an average of $10,100 per year. In part, the low wage reflects the fact that domestic workers are exempt under state law from minimum wage requirements. They are also exempt under state law from requirements to pay overtime. While there is some protection under federal law for minimum wage and overtime, it doesn't cover everybody, and the laws are very spotty and difficult to enforce. Therefore, many domestic workers in Philadelphia are being paid less than the $7.25 an hour for what is often a particularly long and brutal work schedule. We encourage City Council to explore the state minimum wage and overtime rules to determine whether there is some legal flexibility for working around the state preemptions to ensure that domestic workers are paid more humanely. At the very least, we urge City Council to pass legislation that would help ensure that domestic workers actually get paid properly for the work that they have done. Second, protection from retaliation. Domestic workers often find themselves facing threats of various kinds from employers from whom they seek redress for wage theft or other wrongful employment actions. Immigrant workers are particularly vulnerable in this regard, facing threats from employers to turn them into immigration officials. We urge City Council to pass legislation that would make such threats unlawful and provide remedies and avenues for enforcement so that domestic workers faced with such retaliation have a mechanism for protecting their rights. Third, written agreements. Many domestic workers that we have spoken with have expressed frustration at the uncertainty caused by the informal and tenuous nature of their employment relationships. They are regularly asked to do, without any extra pay, tasks that they believe fall outside of the scope of what they were hired to do, or work beyond their agreed-upon hours. Employers cancel at a moment's notice, or unilaterally change the hours of work. Disagreements arise about what the rate of pay is. A written agreement that spells out many of these factors would put domestic workers on a more stable footing in case of a dispute over terms or conditions. We urge City Council to explore ways of facilitating the use of written agreements between domestic workers and their employers. Fourth, freedom from discrimination. The Philadelphia Fair Practice Ordinance currently exempts domestic workers from protection against discrimination in hiring and firing practices. We urge City Council to repeal that exemption and provide domestic workers with all of the same protections afforded to other workers. Finally, access to sick time and other job benefits. As I stated earlier, domestic workers often work brutal hours, not uncommonly working 60 hours in 1 week, often for multiple employers, and are both caring for the young or infirm or exposed to their illnesses. Given the way their employment is structured, they usually are not eligible for certain kinds of benefits and rights available to other workers, such as paid sick time, family leave, and vacation time, and most are not covered by health insurance. There's growing interest, as it's been discussed, in establishing systems whereby domestic workers can accrue benefits that are portable. For example, through benefit banks run by local governments or nonprofit organizations. We urge City Council to explore methods of making benefits for domestic workers portable across employees. We at Community Legal Services believe that all workers should be treated lawfully and with respect, to be able to maintain dignity at their work. We applaud City Council for recognizing and taking up this important cause and urge you to do all that is within your power to protect and empower this important workforce, and we look forward to working with you in this venture.
Thank you all for your testimony. I also just want to note for the record that we also have testimony from the Pennsylvania Domestic Workers Alliance. They have submitted this for the record. In addition to that, from Penn's Arts and Sciences, Assistant Professor of Sociology, Pilar Gonalons Pons, and if I just screwed up your name, charge it to my head and not my heart. And hand in hand, the Domestic Employers Network, and we will be from Ilana Bauer, a member of Hand in Hand. We will be submitting all of this to the stenographer, so this is a part of the notes of testimony for the hearing. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you. Thanks again, Madam Chairwoman, for allowing us to have this public discussion. Allison, I want to thank you from New York for your leadership and for coming down here today in solidarity to the women. I think that's hugely important. I really do look forward to working with CLS, as I was mentioning to Councilwoman Gim here. How we operationalize this is hugely important because this sector is very much underground. And we want people to feel protected, that they're going to come forward and that they're going to be protected. So we really do look forward to working with that. Erica, thank you for sharing your story. Councilwoman Parker for her personal story. You know, I often tell people, you know, this 16,000 people is people, your family members. You know, I have an aunt and a cousin, and this impacts, you know, just the regular family discussion every time you sit down at the table. You know, all I hear are the stories, right, of what happened today, right? What crazy thing, and every time you thought you've heard about the worst crazy story, at the next dinner there's something even crazier. But I really do appreciate the administration's willingness to really figure out how we uplift these 16,000 plus workers, as I said, who are crucial to the stability of homes all across the city of Philadelphia. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Councilwoman Gim, Councilwoman Parker, and the enlightened men here, Councilman Tollenberger, for joining us and really supporting us. Thank you very much.
Councilwoman Gim.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I also want to thank this panel and for the previous panels who spoke earlier for your, you know, incredible stories and courage. We heard them almost a year ago, I think, or last fall, when a number of domestic workers came forward and told us their stories about abuse and harassment, in particular wage theft and other things that happen to folks in the underground economy, and why it's so important for us to include them in our larger scope of worker protections. I really want to thank this panel, of course, especially CLS. You've been a wonderful partner, and Erica, beautiful, powerful words for today. And then my question is for Allison. Thank you so much for the incredible work that National Domestic Workers Alliance has done to uplift women and working people all across this country. And you've made it a human rights issue. You've made it an incredible issue for our country to pay attention to. But I know that you've seen this, as you've seen and worked with states across the country to develop out protections for workers. And as we look at it here in Philadelphia, where we do actually have quite a few laws on the books, but have not traditionally done a lot around the enforcement aspect, what do you think for us is the most important thing we need to start off with in enforcing labor protections for domestic workers and for others as well?
Thanks for your question. Enforcement is extremely important and necessary. And we see this in New York even after the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights was won, that enforcement is really key to making certain that employers understand what the laws are for them as employers, and workers also understand what the laws are for them as workers. So that's key, and it's very important. We see that it's very important to understanding the mapping, so understanding where workers are, what the conditions they're working under, how they're being paid or not being paid, and how it is that they're seeing the importance of domestic worker rights as it benefits them. It's also extremely important that we organize domestic workers into the labor movement. We can't move this work forward unless we're building communities of domestic workers, communities of employers, communities of legislators, faith-based organizations, unions, and the list goes on. We are all in community together, and it's important that we see the value of domestic workers in our community as a whole, and the importance for us to be recognized in the labor movement, because for many years we've been excluded, and the work that domestic workers do across this country it's necessary. So we want to see the voice of domestic workers lifted up. We know that education and know your rights are not enough. They're important, but it's not enough. And we want to make certain that enforcement is constructed in a way that we in New York are using enforcement as an outreach tool, where we have workers, and many of the sisters from New York are in the room today. So many of these sisters are in the park talking to other workers. So using outreach as a strategy and as a tool to reach other domestic workers. We see we have a base of our worker leaders we're training up to become case managers. So their issue spotting, the issues, and it's very easy within a 2-minute conversation to tell the issues that domestic workers are facing on the job. And from there, we bring these workers into our legal clinic, where we support them in going after stolen wages. And as you can imagine, this industry is an industry where there are many immigrant women of color, many of whom are undocumented. And in this current political moment, it's extremely hard for workers to come forward. Yeah. So building trust and building community is at the forefront of the work that we're doing as we're organizing domestic workers. We've also invested in the co-enforcement models, where we've been partnering with city agencies and other community-based organizations to really think about this industry as a whole. Again, I oftentimes say that domestic work is America's best kept secret, 2019, and we want to really pay attention to what these problems are and what are some of the strategies that we're using to fill the gaps so that we can see this workforce as a full workforce and to have protections in place to benefit all domestic workers.
Yeah, I think that your co-enforcement model is the one that I'm most interested in, especially if you front load it. So we've been doing this work a lot with renters and with CLS, working with renters who face eviction proceedings. Again, another thing where we have expanded a legal defense fund for renters, but we need to let them know their rights. And sometimes we as a government entity can put an individual there, but if that individual is there but no one's bringing them to them, then we're not going to make the match, even if we have the intent right, the resources are there. So I'm interested in in New York, was the co-enforcement plan, like, was it front-loaded, and do you have like a direct relationship with the city agencies? Is it through, like, we contract, for example, with CLS to do the education and some of the outreach, and is that the model that we're looking for potentially here?
Yes, so in New York, we've been very fortunate to work with a local law firm called the Urban Justice Center. We partner very closely with the Department of Labor as well as many of the city agencies. And in our own worker development, we have a team of groundbreakers, and they're worker leaders who are domestic workers who we've trained up to understand what the law is, to understand issue spotting, and to go out into the field meaning the parks, the libraries, the bus stations, wherever domestic workers are, and really engage these workers in a conversation to find out more about their working conditions. And through that model, what we've been learning, we went from a pilot stage into our second or third year of running this groundbreaker program, is that we see these workers can be investigators, possibly, hopefully one day working with the Department of Labor to help inform the investigators in the Department of Labor as to how this work is different. Domestic workers work in isolation, and the way they work is very different to many other workforces. So we want to really see how using these worker leaders and using their wisdom and their insight to really help us navigate this industry as a tool for us to continue building upon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're
I
very
know that
welcome.
we were talking earlier about the importance of the direct outreach, mostly language access. I know we don't have as many APIs represented here, but Filipino,
Yes.
Chinese, many Southeast Asian are also deeply impacted by this.
And if I can just add, sorry, across the National Domestic Workers Alliance, we actually do have communities in about 9 or more ethnic groups. So we have interpretation, translation, and in New York alone, there are over 13 different groups that we provide interpretation and translation to. So we're not just talking about English speakers. We want to really facilitate the needs of all the folks who are doing this work across language barriers.
Absolutely, and I know that in particular the language access issue is so critical because the more marginalized people are, particularly around language access, but also in terms of the limited number of languages that are spoken. So if we have Bengali or some of our other South Asian workers, without the appropriate language services here in city government, while we may cover the majority, it's actually that small minority of people who speak Urdu or some of our other languages who become incredibly vulnerable to abuse. So I appreciate your pointing that out. I particularly appreciate the co-enforcement model, and we would love to continue to take a look at your work and see how we can do that better, not only in terms of this particular bill, but all across the board. I think it's essential that we marry organizing with government agencies and with the law to ensure that we have the most robust protections and actually that we end up supporting one another in making sure that people feel safe, protected, and included as part of our broader society. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Taubenberger.
Madam Chair, thank you very much, and Councilwoman Sanchez, thank you so very much for your leadership on this issue and for everyone staying here as well and putting this forward. As a child of immigrants, I know full well about domestic work. My mother was a domestic worker, and so were all my aunts and one uncle, all domestic workers. They came in the 1930s. And the issues that you raised today were similar to what was in the 1930s. And the language portion that you put forward is also very important. And many times people discriminated you because of your accent. And, and coming from Germany in the 1930s was not really, you weren't always welcomed with, big arms around you. You had to work hard, and many times you were discriminated. So the issues you raised today have been around, unfortunately, too long, and I am all ears on remedies to end this. So just want to let you know that you have someone that you might not have thought was in your corner, but is very much so, because it's very much part of our family legacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for this panel? Listen, we want to thank you all so very much for your testimony. I hope we see here that racism, sexism, classism, they're, what do you call it? They're Siamese twins, homophobia, xenophobia, and all of the other phobias that we can think of. These are ties that bind here today. And who would have thought that a person of German descent, for me to hear my colleague, Councilman Taubenberger, note that his mother and the matriarchs in his family were domestics. That is not just the story of African American women down south that we know, but the Hispanic community, you know, also the African community. I mean, Councilwoman Sanchez, this is something that will bind us and demonstrate the connectedness, and that we all have so much more in common. Despite the language we speak, the color of our skin, and all of those things people use to try to divide us and keep us apart. So thank you all so very much for being here. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else here who wishes to testify? We want to thank you all so very much. We're going to conclude this hearing, and Councilwoman Sanchez, we're going to make sure that the notes of testimony, will get them to your office, because I'm sure all of the organizations here, especially in your efforts to work across the nation, this information on the record, Councilwoman, can inform the national discussion. So we'll make sure you get that. Thank you all so very much for your participation.
Thank you.
If there's no one else here to testify, this concludes the business of the Committee on Labor and Civil Service for today. This public hearing on resolutions number 190196 and 190193 is recessed to the call of the chair. Thank you all very much.